Madigan's worst nightmare.
It gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in to the left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
Welcome back to the left. I'm your co-host, your beloved co-host, Shauna East.
And
Why is that funny?
I am just Samina Mustafa. I'm just the other co-host. It's okay. I have no ego. But we have some really awesome guests in studio. We are talking about women campaign managers today. One day we'll be able to say just like a name, like just campaign managers and not qualified. But it is just for folks who don't know that. I think I saw a statistic that if you look at all the consultants in D.C., I think said 90% of them are white and male. And I think it was something like 1% might be like women of color. It's a really, really small percentage. So we have, you're really excited to have Zoe, Jesse, and Candace on the show. And we're going to kind of have each of them introduce themselves, and then we'll have a little bit of a roundtable. But so welcome, Zoe.
Thank you.
So you can just
Thank you.
Oh, there's Candace. Hi.
Hey, Candace.
Hi.
So we're going to start with Zoe. Talk a little bit about your race, the ward, and just how you got involved with the campaign.
So like I actually got this question quite a lot. Like obviously more so now that we're going through the dissection of everything. But I got this question a lot because I was so random, like such a random hire for most people, and it just happened to be that I had done some organising in Cicero, so I had an interest in Pilsen just because it felt like a lot of the families that I was working with came from Pilsen, right, and they were the victims of gentrification, and so I had always wanted to work in Pilsen so that we could stop the rot at its very heart. I knew Byron and Lorene through DSA, but we didn't know each other personally. I just gone and seen Byron's electoral working group meeting, and there was a really funny moment where he went like people say. Like, I say I'm a socialist, and people tell me I'm crazy. I'm like, I'm not crazy. And, like, that was a really funny moment because the AV guy had to, like take out his earphones because Byron was so adamant about how he was so not crazy. And I just found that so endearing. And so I started volunteering for the campaign, and then I fell ill and started doing some nerdy spreadsheets for them. And then got invited to their field team meetings, and then suddenly, I was walking down the stairs from our office one day, and I had a few beers, so I was like, but Lorene was sober, and so she came up the stairs, and she was like, "Hey, I was wondering if you wanted a formal position," and I was like, "Yes, but let's talk about this tomorrow." And also, my leg was bleeding because I was so vigorously canvassing, and so I was just like, "Okay, bye, Lorene, have a good night. I'll be back tomorrow to canvass." And then the next day we had a barbecue at Byron's house after the canvass, and Byron, man of the people he's just, doing the burgers and serving everyone. And then when it was my time, he was like, really like to consider you for a more formal position, and that's kind of how it happened. And I feel very grateful that they decided to entrust what was a campaign, like a 23-year-old campaign for some people, to me, someone who, speaks a bit funny and doesn't really phone bank ostensibly very well.
So great. Well, Jesse, now you're relatively new to Chicago, so.
Yeah, I moved to Chicago 4 years ago from Kansas because I originally wanted to go to law school, and I was hoping that I could meet somebody who would just like fall in love with me and my personality and would fund it. That did not happen.
Oh, no.
Which,
there's still time, maybe.
Yes, there's still time. But I learned about politics in Chicago, and I'd been super involved in Kansas, and so I kept on trying to break into stuff here, but I was really shy and just kind of always stayed to the back. And then a few years ago, I actually just liked a comment. Andre and I had a mutual friend, and so then he asked me if I wanted to get coffee. And I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, you're just getting to know politics. Like, okay. So I kept on pushing him off for like a year. And then finally we met up. And he was like, here's my campaign plan. Here's the guy I want to run against in the 40th Ward. And so we kind of took off from there. And then a few years later, I went to a meeting, and then he had formally asked me. And since I had never done it before, I was like, maybe you should sleep on this. Like this question, like I would love to run it, but I don't know what that means, and you don't know what that means.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So you just literally a Facebook comment. We got blood, beer, Facebook comments. Great.
What about you, Candace? Can you kick it up a notch?
So this is not the first campaign I ran. The first campaign I ran was Delia Ramirez's. I am actually the organizing director for United Working Families. So last cycle, I literally came back from a training in D.C. to a phone call that said, great, you're going to be managing Delia Ramirez's campaign, which was a great triumph. There was 4 great candidates, and she pulled it out by 28 points. But Jeanette's campaign was a little different. Jeanette Taylor is from the south side of Chicago. My family origin is actually in Inglewood. And I said, this was too close to home. I'll be way too invested. I am going to sit this one out and be a friendly advisor from the sidelines. Jeanette said, no, I want you to manage my campaign. And I said, no, we'll find somebody, but I promise you I'll be there a couple of days a week. You can call me anytime. Fine. Then Jason Lee, who at the time was the political director for United Working Families, said, Candace, we really think you should manage Jeanette's campaign. No, it's not going to happen. So PUA, People United for Action, was the first group to endorse Jeanette. And they went to Emma after Jeanette got the UWF endorsement and said, Candace, we really want Candace to manage the campaign. And then I said no again. And then they went to our board president, Stacey Davis Gates, and they went to Emma Ty and said, we need Candace to manage the campaign. And then they came to me, and at this point, I'm there every day anyway. And I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. So that's how I came to manage Jeanette's campaign.
Wow. So it was a long courting process, courting and pushing. And you brought something up, just for those folks who are listeners of the show, we've actually had the candidates for each of these wards that ultimately are now the alder people elect for each. So we've had Andre Vasquez, Byron Cicero Lopez, and Jeanette Taylor on.
And we just want to give a moment for all of you to thank us for helping them win.
Thanks, guys.
Well, we're a little virtual, a little self-serving here a little bit. And Candace is part of the WCPT family too. We should acknowledge that.
Yes.
But kind of something that actually is a kind of a common theme for both Zoe and Candace is that both of your candidates were running for open seats. in wards where the incumbent had a history of being corrupt. In fact, Willie Cochran in the 20th ward was indicted. Danny Solis in the 25th ward wore a wire in the Burke scandal. And so, I mean, there's like, just talk a little bit, Zoe, about what that was like and how did that affect talking to voters and kind of engaging folks?
Oh man, like, gosh. So I'd gone that, so I have Chicago Sun-Times on my phone, and so I get those push notifications, and I'd gone up at 6 to go to the loo, and then I just had a brief look at my phone, and then I was like, it was like Danny Solis, and then just because of the you know, the salaciousness of the word, like Viagra, and then I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to read this, and I'd just gone to bed at about 3, and I was like, oh Lord, the race has turned on its head it turned on its head multiple times even before that, right? You know, Danny Solis dropped out at the last moment, and so and then the Ed Burke stuff was unfurling, and then this affidavit was accidentally leaked, you know, and a Sun-Times reporter, Wiley Sun-Times reporter, just found it, and so and then the race started to pivot upon, just as it was in the city, it started pivoting around corruption, right? And you know, we know Danny Solis was corrupt for years, but this was so solid proof and incontrovertible proof, right, that there was no denying his complicity with the machine, and, you know, doing lots of unsavory things, leveraging his power for his own personal benefit, right, which we've known for years, but his defenders had always been able to have deniability, right, and so it was crucial. I mean, I think it really was probably the race-defining moment, even though we had like a few too many moments for our lifespans, probably.
Right. lots, almost like a soap opera. And Candace,
yeah.
Candace, talk a little bit about you know, you started with a very big field. Obviously, Jeanette made it to the runoff and ultimately won. But I mean, you were starting with a race that a lot of people thought was Kevin Bailey's, the committeeman's, to lose.
And when we say a big field, let me go into detail. There were 21 that circulated petitions, 19 that filed to be on the ballot, 15 that filed to be on the ballot, and 9 in the primary. And they thought it was Kevin Bailey's race to lose. But you all talked about the prison question. In the 20th ward is very interesting. So it's not just Willie Cochran that got indicted.
Right.
It was Willie Cochran. Before him, it was Troutman, and before that it was Cliff Kelly.
Right.
And somebody told me not too long ago, actually the guy before Cliff Kelly was under investigation and literally died right before they were going to indict him.
Oh my God.
So with all of those people on the ballot, the question that we got when we were door knocking is a question that I am very sure that many other wards in the city didn't face. We got asked every day, how are you going to stay out of jail? That was the question on the doors. How are you going to stay out of jail? Not how are you going to fix poverty?
That is
we even got that question some days more than we got, violence in business. We got, how are you going to stay out of jail?
Wow.
And that shows they haven't had a candidate for so long in the 20th ward that really represented the people with dignity and represented the people with honesty. That is a 40-year history of aldermen in the 20th ward being under investigation or going to jail.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of these investigations, like Silver Shovel, which was back in the 90s, really targeted, it tended to focus on aldermen and women of color. And so you have this history of corruption and aldermen getting indicted and ultimately going to jail, but very few white incumbents who have that happen to them. Which brings me to the 40th ward and Pat O'Connor, who, as Jesse reminded me, has been in office longer than she's been alive. So let's talk about let's head up north to the 40th ward and talk about what that was like.
It was fascinating because when you would be out knocking on doors, like there was this sense of like, yeah, he's been there for a long time, but that's good. We like that longevity. Like, how are you going to service people? How are you going to do stuff? And so where we looked at it as who wants like that same representation and that same idea, cloud or how you want to change your ward, but so many people originally, like it was these longer conversations. And of course, ultimately they chose to go for change, but it was this like, not, what are your big ideas for the world, but it was, how are you going to take care of the things right outside of my door? Because that's what I care about most, and that's what O'Connor was known for.
Right. And another thing that folks should know is as the runoff happened, I remember actually listening to a rival radio station, and when folks saw that Andre was going to be going up against Pat O'Connor, they're sort of like, oh, Pat O'Connor's going to win. People just sort of like thought it was a foregone conclusion since he has survived runoff challenges before. But let's talk a little bit about what he did to try to communicate that he should stay in office and that Andre was not the right candidate. I want to just make sure folks know what happened.
Yeah. So as soon as we hit the runoff, I think it was a week or two later, we had caught wind that there was a website that had been put up that was very explicitly paid for by Pat O'Connor. And it was things that Andre had said when he was a rapper, or said on social media forums or in other like completely.
And he had a 15-year career as a rapper.
Yeah. So. Like a Chicago, battle rapper. And so he was known around Chicago. That was probably the weirdest thing when I started the campaign, was to work with a candidate that was known, but not for politics. So we're trying to talk politics and it's everybody else knows him. But so Connor tried to use like his history and like Andre's, what he did when he was younger to exploit that. And he sent it on over 50 mailers. He put it on websites. He would say it at forums and on morning TV, these things that Andre said. So he was trying to use it as this like negative voter suppression of, oh, you should be ashamed if you're going to vote for him. At one point, there is a mailer that said that, your kids are not going to be okay if you vote for Andre, which like let people vote for the change that they want to see, not for something that Andre apologized for. And like we addressed head on really early in the campaign.
Yeah. And I mean, it was like relentless. Like you said, 50 mailers. People were just getting, think about it. That was over just that 5-week period or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And it started to go to taxes at the end because it was even to the point where he paid for polling. So people would call and say these words, and the people conducting the poll were really uncomfortable, like saying these like really grotesque and offensive words. And he called probably everybody in the ward based on how many, people reached out to us about it.
Yeah. And so like those are sort of like what, the three of you have talked about are sort of like somewhat ward specific and sort of the nature of dealing with sort of the corruption in Chicago and the machine. But then there's kind of pulling back, like you still had to do your jobs. You had to build a team. And so talk a little bit about like finding folks to fill out your team. Obviously knocking on doors was a big part of it. And sort of what were the challenges you faced? So Zoe, do you want to?
Yeah, challenges. It was challenging throughout, I think, even when we were able to build a team. I think For the start, it was so before I came on as campaign manager, Lorene Byron's wife was campaign manager, right? But she had a full-time job too. But we only had really like funds to have me on staff, full-time staff, and it was only probably a month before the February 26 elections that we were able to hire a bigger field team. And so it was, we were very much building a volunteer team, and I think, that Byron had done a lot of work in the community, right? And he already had a volunteer base that would go over and beyond, almost like to the level of like being part-time staff, right? We're really grateful for that. And I think, for me, the process of building the team is that we were lucky because we had a sort of cadre of people who were deeply committed to this project that we were building, but it was more so like I had to show them that, me coming in, that I understood the stakes of this very long struggle that they've been going through, right? And that was part of building the team, and building that trust was building that trust in me. And I think that was one of the main struggles, but yeah.
For those listening at home, we have Zoe Chan, campaign manager for Byron Sigcho Lopez, Jessica Peters, campaign manager for Andre Vasquez in the 40th Ward, and Candace Castillo, who is Jeanette Taylor's campaign manager in the 20th Ward. And we're just going to have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back in 2 minutes.
I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about womansplaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's Worst Nightmare?
It gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in to the left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
And we're back. Thank you for listening and or watching To the Left. I'm Shauna East.
And I'm Samina Mustafa. And we've got Zoe Chan of the 25th Ward, Jesse Peters of the 40th Ward, and Candace Castillo on the phone, who managed in the 20th Ward. And we're talking about the challenges of being women campaign managers in a male world. So you wanted to change the topic a little bit. You wanted to veer.
So we were talking about some obstacles that these gals were facing on the campaign trail, and I just wanted to leave a little room if there was any. We know it's difficult for women, particularly in politics, especially getting any paid work in politics. And did any of you encounter any issues with sexism on the campaign trail? Jesse, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was this no-name person when I got hired on. And so when Andre hired me, like, it was a very, like, we discussed salary and then I was paid what I was paid. And for the first 5 to 6 months, that's what everybody wanted to talk about. So we would be like, talk to them about, hey, will you endorse us? Hey, will you fund us? And they wanted to know why I was getting paid what I was getting paid. And when I would talk to other people, men, like other male candidates or male CMs, they were never getting asked that. And it was one of those where it made me question how much I had asked for. It made me question like what I was getting paid and kind of this like, what work am I doing? And then like we kind of going back to the staff and things like that, like we were a very bare bones campaign, to the point that for the majority of it up until the runoff, we only had one other staff member, and it was somebody that I had worked with on a previous campaign that I was with, but it was a male. And so people would walk into the office and then just kind of assume that, oh, he's the one in charge. And then he would tell people, no, like, I need to go to Jesse, or let me talk to Jesse. And it wouldn't, like, people still would go to him. And then it was fascinating because I thought that, like, people stopped asking about what I was getting paid and stuff like that. But then, like, the sexism kind of turned into, so I'm an out LGBTQ member, and O'Connor was, like, super attacking it. And it was something that, like, I had always been super out to everybody for. But then as soon as these attacks started coming, people would come to me and ask me, how could I work with somebody? Or, like, why would I choose to do that? Or, like, what am I giving up for, like, women or LGBTQ stuff? And so instead of talking about, like, who Andre could be or what O'Connor did, it was like, hold on, let's do, like sexism and homophobia 101, right? Like,
Became a personal attack on you.
yeah, and it's like, I am not the epitome of all things women or all things LGBTQ. And Andre, like, he had apologized, he had moved past it. That was not representative of who he was. So it was just every quarter of the campaign, there was this new ism that I was facing.
And it's just unprofessional. Like, why do people think they can ask women campaign managers that, and they don't ask men in the same role? Candace, did you have any experiences like that, or have you in your work?
I didn't this time. Of course, I worked in organized labor for 13 years. So, yes, I've definitely experienced it in organized labor. But I also experienced this cycle of, you're not hard enough on the candidate. You're not, a man would be harder. And yes, I'm a 36-year-old woman, mother of a beautiful 8-year-old child, but I also got a lot of times, especially from older men, oh, little girl, you just don't know what you're doing. And that burned me to my core, because it was, not only is it degrading, but it's like, I've already done this in two spheres, in labor and in politics. So the oh, little girl, we were fortunate to have a very woman-centric campaign. Shout out to Robin Peterson, who is my deputy field director. And one thing that I took very seriously was increasing the ability of young people on the campaign. So I had 2 high school age interns on the campaign from the petition phase through the win. They are also going to intern for Jeanette. And they were taking positions of leadership. And it was hard because some days these young Black women got ageism, racism, and sexism door knocking in their own communities. So we had to manage that. And Jeanette herself had to manage a lot of classism. Oh, you're not a homeowner and you didn't go to college. We can't vote for you.
Wow.
Or I got on the opposite end. Oh, you're just a college kid who doesn't know anything, so I'm not sure you know how to do that. Yeah, so that, we got more of that. But because Emma Ty spent a lot of time on the campaign, Sarah Mather spent time on our campaign, so we had Jay Travis spend a lot of time on our campaign. So we had a women-centric campaign. It was just when we went outside that we didn't have that, for lack of a better phrase, girl power that we got in the office.
Yeah, no. And that, I really appreciate you bringing up that point, Candace, which is that you were mentoring the next generation of, hopefully, campaign staff and potentially candidates in the process of bringing those folks on, the young women on to the campaign.
Absolutely. Just a quick shout out to them. These two young women are amazing because they're actually on the board for one of the first for STOP. So they are the high school students that are on the board for STOP, but they left the campaign not only knowing about the data world, not only knowing about issue, but they got a glimpse into polling. They got a glimpse in putting together a mail program. They were running our phone program. They were doing trainings for canvassing when we went out on Saturdays. And they're 16 and 17 respectively. So Ling and Shania are two young women to look out for coming up in the future, and hopefully we can do that on every campaign going forward.
Yeah, and I think, and that's great. And I think that's the other thing that I think folks, Zoe and Jesse, you sort of dealt with too, because in some ways, like, especially with Andre, sort of his age became an issue, right? It's like, oh, Pat O'Connor's been in office this long, and, Andre has, I think he's like 37 or whatever. So it's, and I think Byron to a lesser degree, but also it's like you're not, you're losing something by voting for someone who's younger. So there was a lot of ageism in the mix for a lot of you. Zoe, let's kind of go back to the 25th Ward. I spent a little bit of time there because I helped organize one of the forums before the runoff, and there were 5 candidates. And, Byron was one of 4 men, and there was 1 woman in the race. And so, like, in some ways, it's like we, Candace had the honor and the pleasure of working for a woman candidate, and you were a woman campaign manager like Jesse working for a male candidate. And talk a little bit about how the dynamics of Pilsen, Chinatown, and all of that.
Yeah. Dynamics of Pilsen, Chinatown. I think that's like.
And we have 1 minute.
Exactly.
Oh Lord.
Gotta get to it, Zoe.
Okay. Well, I think it's. I don't know if I can do it in 1 minute, but I think
it was hard.
It was bloody hard.
Yeah.
I think with respect to gender issues, I feel mortified that Jesse, you had to go through all that. But I think we always set. I think Byron set the precedent, right? Like he was, he led with feminist principles, right? And that was pervasive throughout the office. And so, I think the sort of marker of identity was not so much gender that although if you look at it, our campaign internally, of course, in the race it was different because we had 1 female candidate, right? But internally. A lot of the stuff that we had to deal with was to do with him being an immigrant, right? And in Pilsen, right? And not a Mexican.
And from Ecuador, right?
From Ecuador. And so, I'm this rando who has a confused accent, right? And so, like, it was different. It pivoted over different identity issues, but similarly sort of problematic. But I think, in terms of... I think Byron set a really good precedent.
Right.
And we're sorry, the show's only 1 hour, but we want to give you guys just a minute to tell us what you're doing next, or if you have anything to plug coming up. Now's your time. Jesse, you can start.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be coming on as Andre's chief of staff.
Woo! Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's exciting. Now it's Googling what does a chief of staff do. And the thing that I will plug is just to everybody to stay involved in politics and things like that, because all of these races we're getting ready to go into a presidential election. Those are important, but also stay involved in local politics and hold people accountable.
Right. Oh, that's great. Congratulations. Zoe?
I'm just evaluating a few options. I'd like to carry on the work that we were doing in the campaign, because that's actually where the rubber hits the road, right? And I think it's a damn shame if we had a 300 plus sort of volunteer base, for that volunteer base to dissipate because of the electoral cycle, because the work has to be done now, and for us it's Project 78, this
right,
and the TIFs.
For the folks
stuff.
who aren't familiar with Project 78, it's like a Lincoln Yards, a massive project that's going to be in the 25th Ward. Huge TIF proposal,
Huge.
like hundreds of millions of dollars proposed for this program as well. So there was a public meeting, I think, just this week.
Yeah, right, and a complete paucity of public meetings, and so I think the TIF issue. I think people should be really attuned to, because I think how they rushed that through city council, how they it was an interesting thing. It was the first thing that the mayor had to, make a decisive intervention in, and so I just encourage people to be highly attuned to those projects.
Right. And you're referring to Mayor-elect Lori
Right,
Lightfoot
right.
had to chime in. So, Candace, do you want to tell us what's next?
Well, so for me, of course, the first thing I'm going to plug and want to point to is United Working Families. All three of these candidates were United Working Families endorsed candidates. And of course, if you like this show, you'll like the Brandon Johnson at 10 o'clock in the morning, which I am the illustrious co-host. But I am leaving United Working Families actually to go with Jeanette to be her chief of staff.
Nice.
However, I will always work with United Working Families and what they are trying to build in Chicago. Shout out to Matt Martin, Maria Haddon. Matt Martin, who also had an amazing woman campaign manager, Laura. Rosanna Rodriguez, which we are very excited about. Carlos and Sue Garza, who have been staples for a while. But United Working Families will always be my home. I will always have a home there, but I am going to City Hall with Jeanette.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you.
And just very briefly, we just want to go through our thank yous to Ms. Lady B and Dennis, to Zoe and Jesse for coming all the way up to the far northwest side, Candace, who's on the line, all those at home amplifying our show via social media, and I don't know if Samina wants me to reveal this, but it's actually the end of our contract next week, everyone, here at WCPT.
So we're gonna find. You're gonna find out soon enough. What's next? You're gonna find out
One thing you can do to help us decide our next steps would be perhaps showing your support.
There you go.
This isn't free. We have to pay for the airtime, so maybe you could show us how much you love the show and want us to stay on by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/ToTheLeftRadio. That would really help us make our decision, I bet.
Yeah. And actually, next week, sadly, I'll be out of town. So we're actually going to do a repeat of our awesome show with Tanya Watkins, where we talked about Catch Bail, Tanya Watkins of Soul. Southsiders Organized for Unity and Liberation. That was a terrific show. So we're going to replay that next week. I'm actually going to be in D.C. working on Medicare for All. I'm going to be at the People's Wave Convention. But I do have two things I want to plug. I'm actually going to be having a conversation with George Lakey, an activist, a longtime activist who wrote a book called How We Win, talking about grassroots organizing and nonviolent campaigns. And I'm going to be hosting a fundraiser for the domestic violence shelter Upnagar. That's going to be a week from Thursday, May 2nd, at the Chicago Cultural Center. Unfortunately, I've had some family members who've had to use the services, and I want to make sure we preserve that as a resource in our community. And I think we have like a minute left. So is there anything else you want to plug, Shauna?
If you want to donate to Ilhan Omar, you can get in touch with me because I'm a co-host of a fundraiser for her in Chicago on May 4th.
Got it. So we got a lot going on here at To the Left, and like I said, so we got stuff for you. So April 25th, I'll be at Women and Children First, one of the few independent feminist bookstores in Chicago. Next Thursday, May 2nd, at Chicago Cultural Center with Upnagar, and then get in touch with Sean on the May 4th. But we are out of time. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm Samina Mustafa.
And I'm Shauna East.
And we'll be seeing ya.
Maybe.
I know. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.